It's one of those songs that's instantly recognizable from just the first few notes. And like other works written about terrible tragedies, it has become culturally enshrined. But much like other songs dealing with the loss of human life, such as Woody Guthrie's 1913 Massacre about the Calumet Italian Hall disaster, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Ohio about the Kent State shootings, Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was also initially met with controversy. Joining us now with more insight on this is one of the country's foremost experts on Great Lakes shipwrecks, Mr. Ric Mixter. Ric, thank you for being here.
Jim, I appreciate the time. This is great.
Now, when I say you're one of the foremost experts, I mean that you have produced a lot of award-winning documentaries about Great Lakes shipwrecks. You've written countless books about them as well, including a new book that's out about strictly the Edmund Fitzgerald. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I think way and above all of this is the fact that you are one of a handful of people on this planet who've actually seen the Edmund Fitzgerald in its final resting place at the bottom of Lake Superior. Can you please tell me a little bit more about that experience and what that means to you?
It was a roller coaster of emotions for me because it was really exciting to be on the most famous shipwreck, the largest shipwreck on the Great Lakes. But it was also very humbling and sad because 29 men vanished. And that's what created this mystery of Lake Superior never giving up its dead. So for me, it was a true roller coaster.
So while the country was still dealing with this tragedy, and while the investigation into the shipwreck was ongoing with both the U.S. Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard, up pops Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot, who was in the midst of recording a new album, and he penned the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Ric, can you tell us a little bit more about the song and how that came about from Lightfoot's perspective?
Absolutely. He picked up a Newsweek magazine article that was called The Cruelest Month, and it was all about November gales. And some of the stuff that was written by Newsweek was actually inaccurate about the 1940 storm that they misdated and some other things that were in there. But Gordon Lightfoot was finishing his album, so he thought he'd put on a long track based on an Irish dirge that he had heard before. And he was lucky enough to have an amazing Detroit guitarist on that put in that haunting guitar solo that we're so used to today.
Now, the song did become a hit. In fact, I had found a couple of articles from the Detroit Free Press at the time talking about how just this song came about and praising the fact that that this was paying homage to the wreck and to the folks that lost their lives in this. But that wasn't always the take. I mean, the song being as popular as it was at the time did not sit well with the family members. Is that correct?
It really didn't. In fact, here was the loss, and they were just getting over that. And then the song came up and brought it up, and went to number 2 on the charts. It could not beat Rod Stewart's "Tonight's the Night," but it did get to that number 2 position, which was one of his highest recordings ever. The families figured that he had made all this money off of it and that they weren't getting any cut of it or anything from it. It didn't seem very fair. And I think just being reminded about the lakes was just horrible for not only them, but for everybody who continued to sail over Fitzgerald's grave, which is right in the international border of the U.S. and Canada and right in the shipping lane. So for sailors and for the family members initially, it was not that much of a hit.
But that did turn around over time. I mean, it's been quite some time since the sinking and quite some time, obviously, since the song has come out. And, you and I have known each other for quite some time, and we've worked at various TV stations. But at the 20th anniversary of the sinking of the Fitzgerald, Gordon Lightfoot showed up at the Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point and met with family members to help commemorate that anniversary event.
He did, and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society has had a great partnership with Gordon Lightfoot. I'm now on the board of directors actually up there, but during the 20th anniversary, I wasn't involved. But for him to actually go to the museum was a big step. For him also to share free concert tickets with any family member that wanted to come to a show. Now we see these family members very, very much embracing Gordon as, really the patron saint of not only maritime history, but of preserving the Edmund Fitzgerald song. So that turnaround has been really incredible to watch because other songs about big tragedies didn't really get that break.
And the song itself, if we can talk a little bit about that, lyrically speaking, and from your perspective as a diver and as an expert on shipwrecks, he really did seem to capture, I think, the overall, the somber nature of what had happened to the Fitzgerald.
He did, and unfortunately, though, so much of the song is incorrect. The ship was not fully loaded for Cleveland, as Gordon sang. It was partially loaded with cargo to go into the Detroit River at Detroit. If it was fully loaded, it would have snagged onto the bottom of the Detroit River. The old cook was not on board. It was actually a replacement cook. It wasn't coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. It was coming back from a dock in Wisconsin, but the mill was actually 80 miles into Minnesota. So while the song does capture an emotion, it does very much promote Great Lakes maritime history. There's no question he created the industry because of that song. I have to kind of pick on him a little bit, and I do, because he changed the lyrics later on to go with a new documentary he had seen to take the blame off of the hatch covers, and he changed the lyrics of the musty old church in Detroit, which Mariners Church is not musty. So while people tell me, Jim, that it's not a documentary, it's a song. If he changed the lyrics, I wish he would have changed the ones that were really blatantly wrong, rather than going especially on the hatches, which he felt would help the family members cope with the loss. It wasn't their fault, but the hatches were certainly involved. I saw it personally when I dove it.
Now, you mentioned that. Now, originally speaking, that was on Lightfoot's Summertime Dream when that album came out. And the song itself never appeared on a Gordon Lightfoot Greatest Hits. I mean, we've got one of those biggest ones, Gord's Gold, here. A lot of folks come into our stores, looking for that song when they see a Greatest Hits. And that didn't appear on a Greatest Hits album until the 80s.
And what an interesting thing to go from, as DJs, we remember these songs as being just 3 minutes. To go to 6 minutes long on a song was unheard of at the time.
And it had some staying power, obviously, because it's just the haunting guitar work and the lyrics that really worked themselves into a bit of a cultural phenomenon.
It did, and the timing was amazing. I mean, sadly, it was going into the anniversary of the loss of the Fitzgerald, so December is when it peaked. So the timing was perfect. He had been chased on the charts by Disco Duck, believe it or not. That's the song that was almost going on a parallel course with it, and finally even hit number one where Gord couldn't do it. So that was kind of sad. I mean, to think that we couldn't get number one, especially with a push of the news doing lots of stories on it. But in our hearts, we've long forgotten Rick Dees and his cast of idiots, and we still play every fall. You're going to hear that song.
Now, what is it about the mystique of shipwrecks? Not only the Fitzgerald, but the hundreds or thousands of others that have happened here in the Great Lakes that catches people's attention. I mean, this is something that you're very tuned into with your books and the documentaries that you produced. What is it about just a ship going down like this that captures people's attention?
It really brings in, how powerful Mother Nature can be when it comes to storms. I mean, certainly on the Great Lakes, we lose ships in collisions, in fog. We had fires early on when it was steam and wooden ships. But the storms have taken 40% of the ships out there, and there's been 5,000 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, and we really don't know where most of them are. So we get that intrigue of why did they sink and what happened, especially when we get a ship like the Edmund Fitzgerald, where 29 people vanished in 1975 and not a single body was found. That's where I think the legend kind of built up. Whereas we look at 1958, when the Carl Bradley went down, most of the people were found. There were 2 survivors. In 1966, when the Morale split, it broke in 2 and the stern kept sailing for 5 more miles, but no one survived that. On the bow section, Dennis Hale was the only survivor. So 1 person, but we found so many of the crewmen, they were able to be returned home to their families, sadly to be buried. But the Fitzgerald's families never got that. 29 vanished, and it led to crazy headlines. Even the National Enquirer said that aliens took the crew of the Fitz. So that fed, I think, into the mystique of this song, and especially, its longevity.
Now, Lake Superior, again, according to Lightfoot's lyrics, never gives up its dead. And this is really kind of indicative of that. The lake itself, and you and I have lived in the UP, and we lived on Superior for a while, my wife and I. It's a powerful, powerful entity, and not something you want to mess with on a grumpy day.
It's not. In fact, they still, we both went to NMU, and at Northern Michigan University, part of the freshman orientation is not to go out on the dock during a storm, because every other year or so, we sadly lose a student who doesn't appreciate the strength of that. But it has brought down thousands of ships. There's been 25,000 people lost on the Great Lakes. Sailors and the big storms always seem to affect even more than that. And I track that in my new book too, that the Fitzgerald storm was more than just the crew of the Fitzgerald that were lost. It was swimmers that were in Lake Michigan where a second part of the storm hit. So there's definitely, ancillary really damage that comes along from that and loss.
Let's talk a little bit more about your new book, and we're kind of moving away from the music on this, but you do really take a look at the after effects of the Fitzgerald, so to speak, the visits to the wreck, and of which you were a part of. Tell me a little bit more about this book and what folks can look forward to when they pick it up.
I think people who see my books and especially watch me on PBS, they realize that I say a lot, I will not publish or create a new documentary if I don't have something new. And people might say, well, wow, there's been 8 books on the Fitzgerald. And I'll tell you, 3 of them are fantastic, and I look at them like Fred Stonehouse and Schumacher's book. Hemming's book is a fantastic look at the sailors and the families. He talked to them right after the loss in 1976. So what's the next chapter? Well, the next chapter is, who were the airplane crews that found the Fitzgerald? What was it like on board the Woodrush, hauling 20 hours across Lake Superior to look for survivors? What was it like, from Cooper's perspective, which really there's only been one television interview with him, and I was lucky enough to get my hands on that. So all of these extra bits that I think the story doesn't change, but the behind the scenes stuff really sets up for why people came to certain conclusions, why some of the theories are absolutely wrong. And really, for me, it's more of the personalities behind it. Meet the people who were actually involved, the eyewitnesses there. And in our news careers, I'm sure you'll agree, we get amazing access to dive shipwrecks, to meet people, to bring our camera and to capture this. And that's been a true honor for me. And to be able to turn that into a book is amazing.
So where can folks get a hold of this, and where can they find out more about your works?
I absolutely love to share it with museums. So if you have a maritime museum near you, it will be there. Check any place where there's ships in the Soo Locks. Ask them, your local libraries too. Many places will show up. In the Midland area, I know we've got the dive shop there already has some copies. So there's certainly, if there's scuba tanks someplace, call them up and ask them. And if they don't have it, they'll know how to get in touch with me. Or better yet, I'd love to meet people in person as I do lectures all around the Great Lakes. My favorite is to be able to meet them and to hear some of their stories too, and to share the books and documentaries.
Do you have a website we could steer folks towards so they can get more information?
Shipwreckpodcast.com has my favorite stories on there. Most of them are totally free. You can download The Storm of 1913 and hear from 2 survivors, or The Storm of 1940 and hear from 2 of those survivors. My collection of interviews is unparalleled on the Great Lakes, so I like to share them in a manner that people can hear. If the Fitzgerald podcast is $20 because it's 4 hours long, the men who built it, the men who sailed it, there's just so much information there that I just felt it was more worthwhile. But yeah, if you go to shipwreckpodcast.com or lakefury.com, or you can just search Ric and Shipwreck, and I bet you'll find me.
All right. Well, any other thoughts on the song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot? Do you think that this is something that will continue to have staying power as folks continue to live around the Great Lakes and appreciate the awesome power?
It's just the same as, say, Ted Nugent playing Fred Bear in the fall. We hear the Edmund Fitzgerald song when the storms start to build and we start to see the change in the leaves and the winds start to build. We get that appreciation again for the strength of Mother Nature, and we'll always hear it. And my hat's off to Gordon Lightfoot for creating a song that really brought attention. I would just say that on November 10th, there were over 140 ships that sank over the years. And, there's at least 240 other sailors that were lost. So Gordon did not write songs about them. I hope that will keep them in our hearts as well as we remember, because so much attention's been focused just on the Fitzgerald.
But still a great song, and a great way to remember.
I'll always remember that lyric. Where does the love of God go? That to me is so powerful. It brings tears to my eyes even today.
Well, very good. Ric Mixter, thank you so much for joining us and lending your expertise on the Fitzgerald, the song, and shipwreck lore in general. Very much appreciated, sir.
Oh, I appreciate talking to you, and thank you for bringing this extra chapter to the music that you sell at the store. I think that's an amazing look at it.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Ric.
You bet.